Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Work in Progress. My name is Lu, and today I'll be filling in for Joanna. And today we are talking about a topic that I personally struggle with a lot, self-discipline, a guide to self-control. I don't know about you, but for me, it's just a constant journey of learning more and more about self-discipline every day. Some days are better than others, but I wonder if there's more to it. What's the science behind it? What are some of the things that we should be doing? Maybe I'm doing some things wrong, and I'm sure if you're tuning into the episode, you're here to find out. So our guest today is Maitri Shah, a dedicated mindset and productivity coach known for her transformative guidance. With her holistic approach, she empowers both teams and individuals to cultivate a growth mindset, enhance productivity, foster self-discipline, and achieve their goals with clarity and purpose. In a world where success hinges on having the right mindset, cultivating empowering habits can be key to unlocking your full potential, regardless of the challenges you face. Welcome to the show, Maitri.
Hi, Lu. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and to share more insights on self discipline.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it seems to me like your professional background just exudes self-discipline, and as a very big pillar of it. But I'm kind of curious because it's not always like a traditional approach in our career to kind of wake up one day and think, you know what, I want to empower people to have a growth mindset and cultivate productivity, right? So I wonder why you chose this kind of work and how did you get here?
No, of course, I know it doesn't happen overnight. So the thing is that I suffered from depression back in 2019, and it was purely because I was moving to a new country and I got married, and it was all about the different changes of life that were going to happen. And then depression kind of hit me hard in terms of mindset. And I totally started discovering myself by therapy, like what am I doing, what should I be doing, what should I be changing about myself. Then I got into reading more and more and more mindset books, and eventually I understood there's whole new area of discipline, habits, and mindset practices that can help us just be positive in life and just be disciplined in life. You don't have to always find a therapist to heal through depression, heal through mental blockage and stuff like that. And that's how then I got into the world of coaching. I did some courses, I did some certifications, and eventually I decided I want to help more and more people to build practices for mindset, for self-discipline, so that they don't end up in therapy like me. That's how I got into this journey of coaching.
That's a beautiful story. And, thank you for opening up about it. I think it must be really hard, especially, I've personally experienced depression myself, and I know it can actually be really hard to bounce back. And for you to get here in your career and to learn from that and grow professionally is actually really beautiful. And I'm curious, you said you moved countries, which is why you got depression. Where did you move from and where
Oh,
from and where to?
yeah, I moved from India to the US. It was because I got married to my husband who lives in the US now. Yeah, so that shift of entirely, going away from your family, trying to meet new
Mhm.
people and things like that were giving me a lot
Yeah.
of self doubts for no reason.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think it's also tough when you think about the productivity perspective. You move to a new place and you're like, oh, I'm going to have to work 5 times as hard as others. Because I personally also moved from Vietnam to Australia. And I was kind of like, in that first few years, always hustling and doing a lot, and it's just kind of really hard to keep up. And at a certain point, you have a certain level of self discipline, because you're like, okay, I'm going to work towards my goals, and then after that, you kind of get burnt out and you crash. And I think that's also another thing to look out for, right? So we'll discuss the topic in more details very soon. And I'm excited to talk about it because I think it's going to be a really good conversation. Before we get there, we've got a part we called Have You Met Maitri, where we're going to get to know you a bit better through some of your favorite things. So my first question to you, and I love asking this because I love reading. What is your favorite book?
Oh, my all-time favorite book, the one that shifted my mindset, is The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. It is one of the key books that everyone should read to understand habits, to understand the magical morning routine. And I have followed that entirely for 2021 and 2022, like waking up at 5 a.m. and doing things until 7 a.m. And that has shifted my perspective. So that is one of my top go-to books, which I, tell all my clients to read before they can get into coaching.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. Actually, I had a phase with that book as well. I decided to wake up at 5 every morning to read first thing in the morning. And one of the books that I read during that time was the 5 a.m. Club. I do love that book a lot. Um, Now I'm not doing the 5 a.m. morning routine anymore, but it's still good to kind of remember that. So thank you for the reminder. And next, I would love to know which movie you've been enjoying recently.
Oh, recently I watched this movie, which is an Indian movie, 12th Fail. And it is the movie about determination of IPS officer, who is now an IPS officer, Manoj, who came from a very, very poor family, low income family, who did not have any idea about what IPS is and how to get into a program like that. And he literally failed many times. He went into it and he cleared it, and he's now one of the most renowned IPS officers of India. Also, it has a small hint of a beautiful love story with his now wife Shraddha, and it is just about sticking with each other in all the highs and lows of life. I really love that movie, and I think that movie also won many of the awards recently. So it's
Oh,
one of the best movies. It
oh.
is like one of the most favorite movies of the Indian cinema right now.
Ah, beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing.
But
And you are our podcast guest today. I wonder if you're actually a podcast listener yourself. If you are, which show is your favorite?
okay, so the thing is that I am not a podcast listener. I'm someone who loves reading rather than, going on to a podcast. But once in a while, I do listen to podcasts. And recently, I heard this podcast of Lewis with the author of the book Secret. If you know, The Secret is one of the most beautiful books. It's by Rhonda Byrne. In that podcast, they had much discussion about how to manifest and the law of attraction, and it was one of the most beautiful and detail oriented um, podcasts where you can learn how the law of attraction works and what exactly it is. Once in a while I do go on his channel and watch random podcasts, but I'm not a podcast listener.
Yeah, that's still cool. At least you're still engaging in the podcast world with at least one podcast. So that's interesting.
It's funny how
And
I always ask my husband to get me a transcript of the podcast rather than listening it, because
yeah.
I'm into reading.
Yeah, and you can read articles written, based on podcast episodes as well. Like I think that's also interesting. Sometimes it's just better to read, and I agree. I actually don't listen to a lot of podcasts myself. So how about a role model for yourself? A lot of people say I don't have a role model. Some people say I've got one, and quite a few say I've got many role models. So which train are you on?
All my life, I have had only one role model, and that's my father. And the reason behind being that he is blind by birth, he has not seen this world, and yet he has given us such a beautiful life. I mean, you name it, and I have seen it all in terms of countries or in terms of experiences or in terms of, of freedom. Everything has been given to me by him. And even today, he is one of the most positive person I have ever met. He has not seen this world, yet he doesn't know what negativity is. He doesn't know what depression is. So he has been my role model, and I really look forward to him every time I'm stuck at any point in my life.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And finally, let's talk about education. I'm sure you've taken many courses in your journey to get to this point in your career, and I wonder which one has been the most influential to you.
To be very honest, as such, I don't recall any of the courses because rather than doing a lot of courses, I'm more into reading books. Books have been my best friends throughout my life. I am quite a reader. I have to read every single day, otherwise, my mind just doesn't feel energy in it. So there are a lot of mindset books lately that have been helping me a lot, and I can't really name one because there's bunch of books. From every book, I try to get some insights and I try to put them into practice. So yeah, there are a lot of books, not courses as such.
Mhm. So, if that's the case, let's say you've already mentioned the 5 a.m. Club as your favorite book, but in terms of learning and education, if you were to choose a book that you learned a lot from, which one would it be?
Overall, I would say life. Life is the greatest book that we can get. Um, but again, to be very honest, I can't name one book. There was another book which is also by an Indian saint. That's Life's Amazing Secrets. There is one book which I overall learned because it describes the four wheels of life, like relationship, career, spiritual, and social community help and stuff like that. So that book gave me insight into how much important it is to also dive into different wheels of life, not just keep growing in one phase rather than focus on everything. So that's one book which is definitely one of my top reads, and which I kind of remember that I have read it 3 to 4 times, and I literally have it all in my mind. Even while I'm speaking, I know which chapter has what. So that is one book, which is again a
Yeah,
beautiful read.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Sometimes we don't take courses, but we take a lot of lessons from books. So I think that's also a great way to learn because I know for a lot of people, they actually read a book a few times, they take notes, they learn from each chapters and they even have action items for themselves, when they have read the book. So that's even better than, taking a course, right? So that's good to know. Now let's talk about self-discipline, a guide to self-control, which is the topic of the day today. As I mentioned to you before our recording, this show is about personal productivity. So I'm curious, what is your view on personal productivity?
So personal productivity is a must if you want to, grow in life mentally, physically, spiritually, financially, every way. It is very important to be productive, and with that I would say it is very important to be disciplined to be able to be productive, because only if we are disciplined in life then we can function properly, personally as well as professionally. So I would say it's a must to have. And if you're self disciplined, you have control over your words, over your actions, and you're focused. If you're focused in life, you are never going to, lose track of your goals or lose track of your journey.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And since you're kind of in this productivity slash self-discipline space, I'm sure you've worked with a lot of clients, which is briefly what you mentioned earlier. And each person has a different way of viewing personal productivity. And I'm sure you've heard quite a few misconceptions from these people. So, what do you think to be some of the biggest misconceptions people tend to get when it comes to personal productivity?
Okay, so one thing that I have often heard from all my clients is that what they think about any habit or any self discipline practice that they are trying to follow is that if they have to start, then they have to religiously follow it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But one has to understand the pattern of everything. You are functioning in a way right now, and now suddenly tomorrow you want to wake up and say, I'm going to be a new person. I'm going to change this habit. It doesn't happen overnight, right? You have to be patient with yourself. And I always tell them that it's a myth that you'll be disciplined in one day or you'll be disciplined in a month. It literally takes 66 days to break the old pattern. So that's one myth which all of my clients complain that, I started this habit and I followed it for a week or two. I got a break in between and then I could not restart it. So people tend to quit very easily rather than sticking to it and rather than understanding that it takes 66 days to break the old pattern.
I think that is actually a really good point. Like I don't host this show very often, so this is my very chances of filling in on the show. I'm not sure if it has been discussed at length before, but I think when it comes to productivity, a lot of us are tough on ourselves, where we kind of say, like I'm so productive like this in this particular time in my life, and then I've fallen out of it, and there's, this is not okay. I'll never get back into it, or this is a failure, and I think that is not healthy because we have different seasons in life, especially because, coming from the happiness and well-being science shows at LMSL, I can attest to that. We touched on this briefly as well. And sometimes you just have a different level of productivity. Sometimes you don't have the same level of self-discipline because you need to give yourself a break. And that's necessary, right? If your mental health is not at the best, or if your physical health needs a little bit of a break, you know what? Not doing the things that you used to do all the time is actually necessary. It's a must. So I totally agree with you there.
Yeah, it drains you very often if you are not trying to take a break in between, If you're consistently working for 10, 15 days and you think that, oh, I have overdone myself, then you're about to quit that journey. Rather than it would be always good to have a break in between, like work 6 days, take Sunday completely as a break. Again, restart on Monday. That fuels your journey and you look forward to those Sundays where you get to just relax your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've established earlier on in the conversation, and you touched on the fact that, self-discipline is a very important aspect of personal productivity. So what exactly is self-discipline and why is it so important?
So, in a simple way, it's if there's this one popular quote again by I think an Indian saint. The quote goes like this: "The self discipline is the bridge between your goals and your actions." That exactly defines my definition of self discipline, because if I'm not disciplined in life, I'm definitely not going to achieve anything I desire to achieve, because self discipline brings you focus, brings you clarity, brings you control over your mindset, over your thoughts. And it is very, very important in your personal and professional life, because only if you're disciplined in life, then you're going to achieve your goals. I know it's like a loop of things that I'm saying, but it is equally true. If you desire
Yeah.
to achieve something, then you have to be consistently working towards it. And to be able to work towards it, you have to develop certain kind of habits and discipline so that you don't lose your focus. So
Mm-hmm.
everything is linked. If you're disciplined, you'll be focused. If you're focused, you will be working on your goals. And if you'll be working on your goals, then you will be successful. As simple
Mm-hmm.
as that.
Yeah. So in theory, it sounds great, right? It's in theory, we all know that these are the steps and this is how self-discipline is going to help. But let's just say we are taking this conversation as a guide to someone. So let's say someone is tuning into our podcast to learn about how they're actually going to make it happen. I believe that self-discipline is much more than just a concept. It has to be broken down into actions, into things that we can turn into reality. And you mentioned habits as well. It's a very big anchor. So if we were to sit down and talk about self-discipline from that perspective, let's say it's kind of like a lecture. I know you're probably not a lecturer per se, but let's say if it's a lecture and we are coming to the part where we need to describe the steps, or how we can establish or re-establish self-discipline, because some people are here since they've never been self-disciplined before. Some people are here because they used to be, and then now they kind of fall out of that because of whatever happens in life, and they want to reestablish it. What would be the foundational things that they should know to have self-discipline? What should they do?
Yeah, the very first thing I would say is that you need to start small. When in terms of starting anything with self discipline, may it be your habits or may it be something that you're trying to achieve. Very first thing I would always say is start with a habit. A habit, when I say, it should be something that you love doing and not something that is forced upon you. See, for example, if I talk about myself, this is one habit that I follow religiously is reading book every single day, because I love reading. I am always curious to know about more and more things, may it be mindset, may it be spiritual things, right? Now, I would not recommend anyone to start reading like 10 pages every single day, because if your goal is too high, you're not going to do it for a longer term. Rather than that, you should just sit at a dedicated time and read a page for a day until it becomes a practice that you want to do, that you look forward to doing. So I would say that first, everyone has to figure out what they love doing. This could be anything: reading a book, painting, drawing, practicing a musical instrument, exercising, going out for a walk, jogging, or going to a gym. Anything that they love doing, that they want to do. Basically, there are two things that they need to answer: what I love doing and why is this important for me. Once they have this answer, they know what habit they want to follow. And once they have that habit in their mind and in their body, then they have to start with just 15 minutes a day. Rather than, you might have heard stories about how people say that I'm going to hit the gym for 30 minutes. But then sometimes they might not have those 30 minutes, or sometimes it might be like, oh no, I just want to watch Netflix and not go and do gym for 30 minutes, right? So rather than aiming too high, start small with 15 minutes, sneak out 15 minutes from your routine and do it until you are already, subconsciously doing more than 15 minutes. So you don't have to set a timer about 15 minutes, but once that thing gets into your system, you will not even be aware and you will be following it for more than 20-25 minutes. So the base of anything that you want to do in terms of self-discipline has to be first figured out through habits, develop a habit, and second, start small, maybe by doing only 15 minutes a day. And also, don't do it every single day. Initially, it's always good to start with 3 or 4 times a week, then make it to 5 days a week and 6 days a week. Don't do it every single day. I always keep Sundays free. Even I don't read a book on Sunday. Because then what is the Sunday for, right? I have to free my mindset from everything on Sundays. So always have a break.
Yeah. I think that's definitely important, and you give this example of reading books or going to the gym, but you also said that it's very important. Self-discipline is important for all aspects in life. And, this probably applies to professional goals, personal goals, and we know that it kind of works differently in each aspect because, like going to the gym or reading a book will be very different from like, let's say sitting down and actually working on a project, right? Because it looks
No.
different depending on the context, depending on the time and the activity. So why is it so important to have this self-discipline in different aspects, and how different would it be, in different aspects of life? Because I'm sure, talking about the gym would be different from talking about like working on a project, right? It's not
Right.
going to look the same way.
Yeah. So when you're trying to create discipline in your professional life, right? Say, for example, if you're trying to develop productivity in your project, just as you mentioned, like you're trying to work hard on a project. Now, in that, what happens is that we often get distracted. Even while we are working on a project, maybe we might be having a phone handy, or maybe we might be scrolling Instagram, or maybe we might be distracted with if this project will be successful or not. We might be procrastinating a lot of things, right? So I always suggest that when you are trying to be disciplined in those areas of life, try to do it in the peak productivity hours of your day. Set aside 25 minutes first, do that thing first in the morning, and free yourself from that. Because what happens is that when you're trying to be disciplined in that thing, if you don't do it in the morning, if you don't do it in the peak hours, you keep on thinking about that thing for the entire day, ending into procrastination and not working on it at all. Rather, I would always say create a checklist in the morning for all your professional goals, and whatever is the most important, do it right away in the morning. Set aside 25 minutes, because there's this one technique which is very important for professional life is Pomodoro. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. Pomodoro
Yeah.
technique, which says set aside 25 minutes, work productively, take a break of 5 minutes, and then you can just keep on doing the cycle. So in terms of professional life, if you're trying to be disciplined, one should always start with a checklist. Once you have that checklist ready in your hand, you're very good to stay focused for that day.
Yeah. That is definitely not a new thing, but it's actually hard to establish, right? Because a lot of people forget to rest, and sometimes I think there's another thing that might get in the way, which is perfectionism. Like they want the thing to be perfect, and so they cannot focus. But I think using the principle of self-discipline here would really help in that context. Just like you're saying, just work for 25 minutes, whatever it might be. You can work on different aspects of the project. If you're stuck on one, work on the other, and then take a break, and then come back to it, and then you'll find the project to be so much better, or the task at hand to be so much better. Even life admin, I struggle to do life admin a lot of the time, like, setting aside time to do paperwork, settle bills. Like, it's hard. And that takes self-discipline too, because I had a chat with my housemate the other day, and she was like, oh, I thought I paid the bills, but I forgot. And it happens, right? Because we don't set aside time, we don't really have a routine, we don't have self-discipline, and the days just kind of float by. Especially if you're a working professional and you have a lot of things going on in your life. It could be like your personal life, family. If you have like a family that you've just established, I hear so many different things, and one of the interesting things that come out of all of this is I believe there's research that says self-discipline actually helps you to understand and regulate your emotions too. Especially if you look at this busy context, we kind of like, we don't have self-discipline. We tend to find it hard, and we find it hard to struggle with certain emotions, and we have dead time. And by that, I mean, you just don't know why you feel a certain way, and then you just don't do anything. And I struggle with that sometimes, which is why I find this to be relatable. So why do you think self-discipline would be, crucial in that aspect of understanding our emotions and regulating our emotions?
Yeah. So I would say one of the habits which helps with this is journaling. Now, why is journaling important? Like venting out your emotions, venting out whatever is going on in your mind, is because we are living in a very distracted world. Every now and then we are trying to compare ourselves with anyone around us, maybe watching an Instagram story, maybe watching our friends doing so good in their careers, maybe someone getting X promotion. So what is happening is we are constantly living in those comparisons. Now, it is not always okay or good to go and tell a friend about what you're going through, because you might not want to let everything out of you in front of anyone. You don't want the darker side of your life be out in public, right? Some people are not comfortable, some are introverts in that terms. So in that way, it is always better to let your emotion out onto a paper through journaling. Now, journaling is one of the key practices of self discipline in terms of personal and emotional connection. Because when you're journaling, you get to discover yourself. You become aware of what things you want to change about yourself, what things you want to keep, and what things have you just been overthinking. Because at times we are cooking stories in our mind which are not even real. We're always living in this artificial world of thoughts, which doesn't make sense if we think about it tomorrow, right? So, in those terms, self discipline via journaling is a very good practice to let yourself be you in those minutes and to start becoming aware of things you want to change and things you want to keep in with yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. It's an aspect of self-discipline for sure, because if you have self-discipline and you're following the habits, the routine in all other aspects, and also do journaling, you'll find that it's a bit better to understand why things are happening a certain way. And I have found that for myself personally, that is actually true. It's the case. I used to journal religiously growing up. Every day I would do that, and then in my early 20s, I start to not have enough time for that. And then that's when I struggle a bit more with my emotions. And then recently I find it to be the same thing. Like, when I don't journal, I feel like my mind is a mess and everything is a mess and I really don't understand what's going on. But when I sit down to journal, even if I just journal for 10 minutes and just let out the thoughts that are on my mind at that particular moment or that particular time, it really helps to kind of, I feel like in a way it's kind of like I organized my life just through journaling. And I think that's really helpful. So yeah, I think it is important to build that in as part of self-discipline. So when we're trying to do all of these things, right? And we discuss personal life, professional life, with all the different goals and all the different things that we are supposed to be doing. So self-discipline sounds great. And I'm sure a lot of people are kind of, the gurus in this area. They kind of like, they have a routine, they know exactly what they're going to do, and they show up all the time, no matter what. On the other hand, some people struggle because there are challenges when it comes to this space. They're just not as good. So what do you think to be some of the key challenges when someone really wants to have self-discipline, but they're struggling? And how can we overcome those challenges?
Of course, yeah, I love this question because there are two things that most of the people commonly suffer from. One is consistency, and second is procrastination. Consistency, because what happens is when we are trying to break the old pattern and we are trying to develop a new self discipline thing in life, we want success immediately. We want to ace that particular thing in a day or two. But that doesn't happen. You have to be consistent at it for a longer period of time for that new thing to become a part of your mind and body. So that is one thing which most of the people suffer from, which is consistency. And second is procrastination, because a lot of times we keep on thinking that tomorrow I'll hit the gym, tomorrow I'll work on X side hustle, tomorrow I'll do this, tomorrow I'll do that. Instead of just thinking about that thing, it would be always better to write down the action plan of what you want to do tomorrow, right? Because when you keep on thinking, you tend to get tired mentally and you always find an excuse to not do it tomorrow. Rather than that, it was always better to create baby steps or action items, which are like literally very small. Say, for example, if someone is wanting to start a side hustle on Instagram, a side business of doing something on their own, then they should just create a goal. Tomorrow, I'll open my Instagram business page and create a bio. This is such a small action item, but once they do it tomorrow, it will fuel them for another action item for the next day. So that's how one should progress, by creating small and literally baby steps towards the final goals. That is one way to get out of the procrastination trap. And for consistency, I would always say create a reward system. That works the best. Like follow a self-discipline thing for 6 days a week. On Sunday, create a reward for yourself that if I have religiously followed this thing for 6 days, on the seventh day, I'm going to reward myself by having my favorite cup of ice cream, right? Or by calling a friend, or by doing anything which is entertaining, by watching a Netflix series, binge watching, say, for example. So there are two ways to handle, like create a reward system. And second is baby steps to beat the procrastination trap.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's certainly helpful because sometimes I struggle with little things too. Like, when it comes to consistency, I guess, like with the gym, I'm okay. Like I love going to the gym now, but in the early days, I was like, okay, I have to go out for breakfast every time I go to the gym as a reward. And, later on, I found that to be not so good for my wallet. So I stopped doing that. But then, it became, okay, I'm going to go to the gym at least 5 times a week. And as a result, I get to go out for breakfast once a week or something like that. And that's actually fun for me and my friends to do because we go together and then we have all these meals together and it's kind of fun. But in other aspects in life, it feels a little different because, like let's say working on a project, like a personal project. I have this random personal project where I want to document everything that I read on my Notion. And then I just kind of like, I have this board and I want to update it. And sometimes I'm like, I'm so inspired, I'm going to sit down and do it. And then other times I'm just like, oh, I cannot be bothered, and then before I realize it, I've missed like 10 books. I've read 10 books, but I haven't summarized them. I don't remember what I read. And that's where I struggle. But from what you're saying, I guess the lesson here is to, break it down and, create a system for myself. It doesn't have to be an everyday thing because we have different aspects in life we need to work on, right? And if we want to get there, you don't necessarily have to do it every day, but choose a particular day in the week where you do that particular activity and then have a reward for that. Or the activity in itself is a reward, and building that into our routine is actually quite fun. Because I used to be this person that have like a whole calendar for activities that I would do every day. And then, like after being very burnt out, as I mentioned to you earlier, like moving countries, lots happens. And, you just get burnt out after you hustle for so long. I just fell out of that. It was actually quite fun having that calendar, but then I fell out of that. But today I'm quite inspired to build my calendar up again and, just have that as something to follow. So I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to know that you were, inspired to do that. I would always also add one point that when you're trying to work on multiple things, like if you have multiple, say for example, someone has a job and a side hustle, or someone is into multiple business, or someone is into multiple, trying to set up multiple things. It is always good to break down tasks on different days. Say, for example, Monday, I'm going to work on X startup. Tuesday, I'm going to work on X project. Wednesday, I'm going to work on X project. Again, repeat that cycle. When you have different projects for different days, you really look forward to working on it because you're excited to do something new rather than feeling, lost or feeling overwhelmed by a lot of things on your plate. It's always good to break down certain days, certain tasks. That might help better. You have to try to create a system that works best for you, and you have to try to explore a lot of different techniques out there. As for example, I mentioned Pomodoro, then there are Eisenhower metrics. There are a lot of such productivity and self-discipline techniques already available, which anyone can Google on the internet and can figure out what works best for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There are so many different techniques, and I think we can get creative there because, different things would work for different people. And we've covered this quite extensively. So now let's go into our practice section to talk about a particular practice that our audience can try today. We've discussed, I think, actually a few practical things. But for someone who is struggling and who's never had a system before, and I know a lot of my friends are like that. They're just kind of like, oh, I just go with the flow. I do have a routine, but for the rest of the day, I just kind of go with the flow, and then they end up not getting a lot of things done. And they blame that they don't have enough time, for example. So I think this would actually help. The practice section would really help people like that. And if you were to recommend a practice for self-discipline that you personally do, that you think would be simple enough for anyone to try, what would it be?
So it's always and a must, which is creating daily checklist. I love the simple habit, which is so powerful because when you have a checklist ready on your phone or on your diary, you exactly know what to expect in the day. And it's okay if you cannot achieve 100% out of it. But when you have a checklist, you are going to achieve 75%, which is a very good number for a beginner or for anyone who has already aced, daily productivity. And when I say checklist, it literally has to have every single thing in detail. See, for example, since I am a mother, I have a 6-month-old baby at home and I have to do his massage and I have to bathe him and I have to give him food and do all those things, right? I literally mention every single thing about that too on my checklist, along with my meetings, along with my mentoring sessions, along with my, I'm also writing a book now. So I also put down time where I am very productive and where I'm in a positive state. I mentioned about that book too, that, spend 30 minutes on this, read a book, or make lunch, make dinner, make salad. Every single thing that I'm going to do in the day is there on the checklist. Also, it is mentioned in a way so that I know what to do in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. So basically, you have to prioritize it. So that is one habit that everyone should follow, and it should be very, very detailed. Once you get, very good at it in detailed way, I'm sure anyone will be able to do things in a snap. It would be very easy to follow. But of course, you have to create a checklist daily for at least 3-4 months to be able to ace it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And, actually, speaking of checklists, I used to do that too. One thing I do struggle with, and I think people might struggle with it when they try the checklist system, is that you tend to be overly ambitious about how much you can do in a day sometimes. And then you don't finish everything on the checklist and then you get frustrated. So I'm sure that's probably happened to you before. And, if that happens, what should we do?
Yes. So it's always good to have tasks which are important and tasks which are not urgent. So once you have those tasks in the important list, you know you have to finish this, and the not urgent ones can always be carry forwarded to the next day. When you have bunch of tasks in those ways, you are not going to feel overwhelmed, and you're going to stay focused at least for 50 to 60% of the work that you have to do in that day. So always try to break it down in two sectors, important and not urgent, and move the not urgent one to the next phase.
So thank you for sharing about that tip for the practice. I think it's definitely a good thing to keep in mind. I think moving things over to the next day is probably going to give us peace of mind, and I think it's also a good thing to sort of learn how to plan your checklist, because we then will know our energy level and our capacity in a day. I think I learned this concept somewhere. I'm not sure if it was from a book or from a YouTube video a long time ago about productivity, but basically, the person that was talking about it was kind of saying, plan things and evaluate how much you can do based on your level of energy too. So I think that's another thing we can combine with when we do the checklist system. If you have a very high energy day and you're like, you know what, I'm very energetic about today. I'm going to get a bunch of things done, then the checklist can be a bit longer. But then if you have a low energy day, you're kind of tired. I think getting just 2 or 3 big things done uh, is already a really big achievement. And, that is something to celebrate. And then you feel a bit more energized for the next day and the next day. Otherwise, somebody might try this practice for the first time. And, after about 3 days of not getting everything done and getting everything accomplished in a perfect way, they might give up. And that's the last thing we want. So I think it's important to have that in mind as well, to be kind to ourselves and understand our energy level.
Definitely, yeah. It's always important to be kind and also to not be over kind and to, have a lot of breaks because then you tend to be lazy with yourself, right? It's always good to, take a break in between and to have some days where your workload is less or minimal and you can free your mind from everything.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that practice. So now we have a few questions from the audience, and in the interest of time, I might, just choose a few key ones that I find interesting. The first one, I think this is a good question. Can self-discipline be learned at any stage of life, or is it more effective in childhood?
No, of course, it can be learned at each and every stage of life. And, recently it has been like practicing anything new has no limit in terms of age. You see many of the YouTubers, like their grandmothers or their nannies, or, they are doing so successful in their YouTube career at the age of 70. Someone is starting a business at the age of 70, you know? So age has no limits in terms of that. All you have to is that you have to have your why very, very clear about why you want to do this and what you want to do.
That is a great point. And I think that's encouraging, because a lot of people might kind of say, oh, you know what? It sounds great in theory, to have self discipline, but I'm too old for that. It's hard to set up routines, and, it just doesn't work for me. That's actually another answer that you tend to get from adults. Like, I think from uh, children, it might be a bit easier, because, with the right direction, the right kind of education and nurture, they can actually learn and they will embrace it. But I hear this from a lot of my adult friends who kind of like, yeah, no, it's too hard. This is not for me. Like, I cannot deal with checklists. I don't like keeping a calendar. And then I heard this from the same friend a few weeks later. I really should keep a calendar, because, something slipped out of their mind. They forgot to do certain things. And then that messed up their whole day and their whole week planning. And it's just interesting how these things sort of play out, right? It doesn't matter the age, but it matters the mindset, exactly what you're empowering people to embrace. So I find that to be interesting. Yeah. So next question, also a good one. We briefly touched on it, but we didn't go into a lot of details. How can individuals maintain motivation and momentum during setbacks?
Resilience, of course, resilience is one of the key to be able to grow in your life. You have to bounce back from your failures. You have to always remind yourself every time you feel that this is just a experience that is going to help me be better into something which I don't know yet, but is going to be so powerful. I also always say that create vision boards. Like you should have a yearly vision board so that you know what you want to achieve in this year. And once you have that, make a habit to look at that vision board every single day, you know, because even if you hit failure in between, the next day when you look at that vision board, you know that you're going to bounce back on it. You know that you have to work on it because that is your goal for, say, for example, 2024. So always have vision boards and also always have some sort of motivational quotes here and there that you can read. Have a work environment which is very empowering, which is very motivating. Make your environment super motivative so that even if there's a small hurdle in between, if there's a small failure in between, your mindset will be able to trick it. Your mindset will be able to empower you. Your subconscious mind will remind you to bounce back because it is always about subconscious mind, how it plays a key role in terms of helping you go towards your final goal.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice for anyone who's kind of like struggling with finding their ways of approaching this, with a lot of motivation. Because a lot of people kind of say, oh, you know what, motivation, uh, it's just you either have it or you don't. And I think that's not really the right way to go about that, right? So, yeah, that's a good point. And finally, in this part, we also touched on this briefly in our conversation. Um, but I love asking you this because I think from my perspective, I actually host the well-being science show at LMSL called Doing Well. So I love to know what you think about this. How does self-discipline impact mental health and emotional well-being?
So it it can drive you crazy if you're not disciplined in life, you know. You might be always feeling negative about yourself. You might be thinking that this thing is not for me. I cannot achieve this because you don't have certain kind of discipline or habits or mindset to achieve that. So it is very, very important to be able to be disciplined so that your mental health, your emotional health is aware of who you are, what you're trying to do, why is it so important, and eventually it will help you grow towards that journey. So I would say I mean, self discipline is highly rated in mental and emotional health than in any other areas of life. You know, once you're disciplined, you can easily move forward in your professional area. But if your mental and emotional health is not at a good state, you won't be able to progress. So it is very, very functional for you to be mentally and emotionally well in terms of discipline.
Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially because we have a whole podcast on the topic of well-being at LMSL. And since in your previous answer, you mentioned resilience, and in this question, we have well-being, I would like to take this quick moment to plug our show. So Joanna also hosts another show at LMSL called Bouncing Back, and that is for the resilience science. And I also host the show called Doing Well for well-being science. So if you're interested, please check that out on our website. And thank you so much for answering all these questions from the audience. I think they provide a lot of new insights into our topic today because there are so many different angles of self discipline. And before this, I actually didn't really think about the fact that self discipline could be linked to emotional and mental well being. Even though I host a whole show on that topic. This is kind of new to me to learn too, to get that kind of new perspective. So thank you. And next up, we have open mic. And I know you've got a few things you would like to share with our audience. I also heard that you are writing a book. So perhaps you would like to talk a bit more about the book as well. So go for it, Maitri.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. So yeah, I'm currently writing a book which throws light on how can you start small, which is all that we discussed in today's podcast. How can you start small in 5 areas of life? I have divided the 5 areas into career, health, relationship, spirituality, and social health or community. So, how can you actually start with baby steps and not lose the grip of your journey in between? So, I'm so excited to, just finish that book and create the final version, hopefully in March, if everything goes as planned. I'm almost 70% done with that, and I cannot wait to share that book out with everyone so that everyone can improve in their life, in all the areas of life. And apart from that, I also host a lot of webinars and workshops on mindset practices that one should be following. So if anyone is interested, they can always reach out to me, and I would be more than happy to help through my workshops or through my mentoring programs that I offer.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing about your current project on your book, and we'll be excited to find out when it comes out. And speaking of which, if our audience would like to find out more about your work, your webinars, your book, where should they go?
No, of course. Yeah, I'm almost super active on LinkedIn and Instagram. My Instagram username is Coach Maitri Shah, and my LinkedIn is Mentoring by Maitri Shah. So anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Instagram, and I'll be always happy to answer and connect with everyone. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I had a great chat with you, learned a lot more about self-discipline, and it was a wonderful chat.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a very nice opportunity to also get to know you, to also learn about the practices that you follow. It's a win-win situation for me too. Thank you so much for inviting me on this podcast.
You have been listening to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website pp.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.